Hi everybody, Father Alex here, host of the Godcast, Vicar of St Matthew's Church, author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Ultra Priest Story, available in all good bookshops and online. My guest today on the Godcast is Steven Isserlis. Steven is a world-renowned cellist. He's a famous musician, and we're going to be speaking to him. I think he's over in the United States. So I do hope you enjoy this interview now with Steven Isserlis. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is world-renowned musician Steven Isserlis. Steven, it's wonderful to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
Huh. Jet lagged in New York, but I'm okay. Thank you.
I was looking at your website earlier, and you are certainly a man on the move, aren't you?
Well, I was very lucky actually, because I was meant to fly I had a concert in Madrid on Sunday morning. I was meant to fly to New York on Monday from Madrid, which would have been a disaster because of the power cuts. So luckily at the last minute I changed to Sunday afternoon. So at least that was lucky. I got here.
Yeah. How does that play into being the musician, Stephen? You know, this constant source of travel. I mean, one of my favorite bands is a band called Depeche Mode, who I'm sure you've heard of, and they've toured and toured and toured uh, across the world, night after night after night. And I do sometimes wonder, how do you do it and keep it fresh and keep the the vigor in your performance? How do you deal with it?
Well, the only thing I hate is not being able to sleep, as last night. Um, But music keeps me fresh, really, when it actually comes to the music. I hate performing when I'm really tired and everything. But I never get bored with music, the music itself. Um,
That's nice to hear.
oh,
What
I love it.
about? Yeah, well, I've interviewed a lot of musicians, and I recently interviewed a bass guitarist called Rudy Sarzo, and he's a man in his 70s, and he just told me that he was just, in fact, he was constantly learning. You know, the thing never gets kind of finished. Is that your mentality? Would you concur with that?
Absolutely. I absolutely concur there. Yeah, I'm playing music greater than than I can ever make it sound. I can't plumb all the depths. I just keep trying, and it keeps talking to me in different ways every time I play it.
Can you give an example, Stephen, of where that's happened? You know, where you've played something recently where the music's revealed something to you that you've perhaps not discovered before,
Well,
or
it's just really is like sort of the phrase will have a slightly different nature or a slightly different shape or something. Yeah, it's as if ideally it should be as if I was composing it or listening to it as I go along. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's not anything drastic. Usually there are sort of connections between themes and things that I can find, which are interesting. But it's more the question of somehow a phrase will feel a bit more sad or more joyous, or I'll want to go to a certain note in the phrase, make it the high point of the phrase, and then another night I'll go for another thing. It's and just different colors, different dynamics, everything. They just occur on the spur of the moment.
is it
Um,
quite exciting when you get those moments?
yeah, I mean it's happening all the time when one plays. Otherwise, it would just become routine. Yeah, I mean, I think playing music is exciting. Yeah, it's not those particular, I mean, it's not just one particular moment. Everything will feel a bit different every time. I just played, for instance, a Haydn concerto 3 times in Madrid and it felt different every night. Well, 2 nights in a morning. Yeah, it just sort of just said something slightly different, not drastically different, but slightly different. It's like having a conversation with a friend. You don't want the same conversation over and over again.
No, Stephen, a question I like to ask musicians, because you're in many ways you're kind of in a very unique position. I would love to be in a position where you are on a stage in front of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. What's going on in the world of Stephen when you are on the stage and you are performing and you are, are you just in the zone? Is there an element that you need to perform? Can you just explain to the viewers and listeners what's happening for you as the artist?
There are different layers. There's one, especially if I'm playing from memory, there's one terror layer. You're going to forget the next note. which I know is going to be my problem here in New York, not with those not enough sleep. That'll be a major element. There's also listening to the story of the piece and being moved by it, or whatever, being taken by it, taken on a journey. There's also, oh, that person looks bored, that person looks as though they're enjoying it. There's that. And then there's sort of playing with members of the orchestra, if it's a concerto, or with the pianist, if it's a piano, whatever. There's that communication, that conversation going on. So it's many different levels at once.
Yeah. And what do you think it is, Stephen, about music that has the capacity to kind of transcend? As I asked, I'm just trying to think, a guy called Vinnie Colaiuta, a drummer who was a Sting's drummer,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and Frank Zappa's drummer, and he was a religious man, and he said it's a heavenly language. It's something of the other, and I'm going to ask you in a minute about religion, but again, would you concur with that? What is it about music that does these things to us?
Hard to say. I also say it's the language of the gods. Um, I don't know. It's very hard to say, why music moves us so deeply. I mean, I can usually tell a story for a piece, but it's in music, not words. The actual story. I could tell the story in words quite often, but because it's music, it's much more subtle than that. I mean, I think I said in my first children's book, there's no musical notes for the word sausage. But on the other hand, music can describe so much more subtly than the word sausage can describe a sausage. That's sort of a fact. Music has in itself so many layers.
Do you think
I
it's
think.
important to know the story behind the music? I
Well,
mean,
I mean, I can make it out. It's what the story says to me. I'm not saying that's the composer's story necessarily, but there's a big difference between joyous and tragic and things like that, quite basic emotions in different bits of music, different pieces of music, of course. And you can tell whether music is looking forward, going forward, or it's looking backwards, nostalgic, things like that. But again, as I said, they're just too many layers to be put into words.
yeah. And as a younger guy, Stephen, was your family a religious family? Were you raised on?
Not at all.
No.
I had my bar mitzvah. I became bar mitzvah when I was 13, but I have to admit that that was really just so that we'd get enough money to buy me a cello bow, which I desperately needed at that point, and we did get it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I enjoyed it. But basically, when I go into any place of worship, it's the music that moves me the most deeply, if I'm honest.
Yeah. And if it's I interviewed a lady called Jennifer Johnston, opera singer. I don't know if you've worked
Yeah.
with her.
I've met her, I think, yeah.
From Liverpool, and I asked her a question about religion. Obviously there are lots of religious pieces, particularly in classical music, but she was I think she said she was an atheist, and but I kind of asked how she connected. Is it easy to connect to religious music, even though one might be described as non-religious?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was an atheist, agnostic perhaps, but certainly not atheist. Um, yeah, it's very easy. It moves you, and it doesn't matter that I'm not religious, I'm not Christian. Bach was Christian, and therefore you have to think of Christianity. In fact, I wrote a book about the Bach suites, and perhaps slightly controversial chapter is that I posit that maybe the six suites are describing the life of Christ. And that is an inspiring idea for me. Um, I don't know if it's right or not. It may not be. But I sort of came up with more evidence than I thought I would during the course of the research for the book. But yeah, I mean, I find religious music, perhaps among them, some of the great religious pieces, perhaps the most beautiful pieces, most sort of, stunningly moving pieces I know, like St. John Passion, St. Matthew Passion, Bach's Mass in B minor, Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, Fauré's Requiem, etc. Um, I find very moved. Maybe I'm religious while I'm listening to them or while I'm playing some religious pieces, but
Do you think without them you'd be an atheist?
no, I can't believe atheists. But also, I have to say, I can't believe sort of, um,
Like
sort of
people like
strict.
me.
Yeah, exactly. Strict Christians who actually believe, that Christ was virgin birth and crucifixion and resurrection. Well, I believe crucifixion, the resurrection, and things. I would find that very hard to believe, but it doesn't matter. It's
Yeah,
faith.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to place on the record. I'm not, I love the discussion, and I wasn't for people who are watching. I've not been a lifelong Christian. It kind of came and grabbed me when I was in my 40s. So yeah, so I have a lot of sympathy and understanding with what you said there, Stephen. And what about your journey to becoming one of the greatest musicians in the world, Stephen? Uh, were you spotted? Were you known that you were heading for this trajectory and you were going to be one of the leading great musicians?
And you um, I don't know. Um, I certainly never aimed to be an average cellist, but whether I'm one of the leading musicians, I don't know. I just, music is my passion. It's my absolute love. I have to listen to it all day, basically, even when I'm not playing it. And I came from a family of musicians. So, yeah, it was never my aim to be anything other than a cellist, really, or at least from the age of 10 or something.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what you say to this, Stephen. 'Cause we've started a youth choir
Oh,
in
yeah.
church. We're in a very urban setting. We're on quite two large deprived estates, and I've set this up because I think musical has got a wonderful capacity to change lives and things. But I am getting kind of kids come in and then dipping in and dipping out, And did you go through that at all? It sounds from what you were saying, you've just loved music from the beginning to where you are now, and there's been no kind of moments of kind of, well, it's not for me. Have you ever kind of drifted away at all?
A bit, I think. I left school when I was 14, and then I had a year at home studying in London. And my mother would go out and think I was practicing, and I'd steal off to the local library and read about the Marx Brothers, which was my obsession then. And then I'd be back before she got back. So it was, there was a somewhat low point there. I wasn't making much progress, but it was fairly brief by many people's standards, I think. And I never really went off music. I mean, it would be terrible. It would be like you suddenly not believing in God, for me not to be moved by music. It would be a traumatic.
Yeah. And what's your assessment of the classical world now? I've had a few people on from orchestras, and for them, life is not kind of people think it's a life of luxury, but for lots of musicians, the money's not brilliant. Lots of traveling, lots of time away from home. Is the industry holding up amongst everything else going on in the world?
Well, I think everybody's in trouble financially and across all sectors except maybe hedge funds, things like that. But I would say, I don't know, there's always concerns, always worries. And if you're in an orchestra, you have to work really hard and it's less rewarding in everywhere than what I do in a way. But of course, it suits some people best. But you're being told how to play the music, and that can't be easy if you don't respect the person telling you. And you have to be there at 10 o'clock in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. And I mean, I think British orchestras are incredibly patient, actually. I've played, I've rehearsed with the Philharmonia Orchestra, for instance, one orchestra, on their third session of the day, i.e., they've already done 6 hours. And they're so good natured about it. I think that's very impressive. I think in other countries, orchestras are far more spoiled than in British ones. Um, so, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, people always say classical music is dying. I don't see it as, I think actually it got a real boost in COVID because then we saw how much people need music.
Yeah. Do you? I suppose in many circumstances, people come to see you or the other lead musician. Do you? Is the part of you that would like to be full on in the camaraderie of the orchestra, or do you feel you are when you're playing? Just explain a bit of that, kind of being part of the whole.
Yeah. Well, I always think, I think that. concertos are chamber music. So when I play with orchestra, I really listen to how they're playing and we exchange sort of, it's a dialogue with the orchestra. I'm not in the ranks of the orchestra, but I am sort of, it's not like I'm sitting there doing my thing and they're sitting behind me doing their thing. Not at all. It's really a dialogue. It's a lovely experience, just because it's most recent, the Spanish National Orchestra in Madrid. And they were really lovely. And they, I worked quite hard with them. Um, and they were so responsive. And, that's a joy. So,
And I'm just trying to ask a question, which I think the general public might be thinking, does the composer make a difference? You know, um, sorry, not the composer. The I've lost the word, Stephen. The guy with the
conductor,
baton. The guy with
conductor.
the conductor. Sorry, I don't know where my brain went there. I'm sorry. But does the conductor make a difference, particularly to somebody like you, who, with the greatest of respect, you're a man of a certain vintage. You've played for a number of years. You know, does it matter much to you?
Yes, hugely. I mean, it's like chamber music with the conductor. And it's absolutely, it's crucial. The orchestra is crucial, and it's conversation with them, and the conductor is crucial, and it's conversation with he or she, with him or her rather. Um, yeah, or with them. Um,
And what's the
but
feedback like?
absolutely.
What's the feedback like, Stephen? You strike me as a gentleman that might not be backwards at coming forward. Do you...
It can be a problem. I have to be careful. I'm much more diplomatic now than I used to be. But there is a long list of conductors with whom I played once. Actually, the conductor here in New York is a wonderful Australian lady called Simone Young. And I met her in London towards the end of lockdown. We did a video of the Schumann concerto, Schumann cello concerto with the Philharmonia Orchestra. And then she invited me to Sydney, where she's principal conductor. And then she invited me here. Simone Young, she invited me to Sydney, and then she invited me to New York, which is very nice. But I think the main reason was, I mean, I think we obviously did get on very well personally and musically. But when I went to see her before we started the filming for the Schumann, we started talking about television we were watching. And it turned out we were both watching the same program, a wonderful French series called Spiral or Engrenage. It's a police series. And she said, "Oh, isn't it terrible when Pierre dies?" And I looked at her and I said, "He's still alive where I am." I think she felt so bad. She invited me to Sydney and New York.
Yeah. Oh well.
Expiate her guilt.
Yeah. And you mentioned the book, Stephen, as well. How did that come about? Were you invited to into the world of being an author, or was that something you pursued
Well,
yourself?
I've written four books, the first two for children. The first was really started for my son because he was about 7 or something. He was, obviously heard classical music the whole time, but I couldn't find a book I really liked for him about the composers. So I started writing it myself, and then it got accepted. And after it got accepted, I started, I wrote that, and then they kept asking me for a second book. I said, no, no, no. And then eventually I said, okay, I'll do a second book. And then third book was basically because I was touring with the Asian Youth Orchestra, and they always used to ask for my advice. And Robert Schumann in the 19th century wrote wonderful advice for young musicians. So I sort of combined his advice for young musicians with thoughts of my own. I sort of updated it for the YouTube age, Facebook age. And then the fourth one was about the Bach suites, which it was just that during lockdown I was practicing the Bach suites because, of course, I was practicing anything for solo cello. And I was just sitting there thinking I could write a book about these pieces. I thought so much about them. So I did. And yeah, so that was my four books.
I presume you found great joy in that, and maybe a different kind of feeling of satisfaction to playing the instrument, or is it?
Yeah, it's very similar, actually. It's communicating about music. They're all four about music. So it didn't feel that different. It's I just love to communicate with people through or about music.
We talked briefly before we hit the record button about, I'm an author as well, and
Hmm.
I might as well plug it. It's here, Our Daily Bread, forwarded
Yes.
by Alistair Campbell. Did you have the joy that I had when the first copy landed through the door?
Yeah, it
And
was exciting, especially the first book. Yeah,
yeah,
it's nice. Um, yeah, it's nice,
and
Alistair Campbell.
any plans to write more or
Not at the moment, no. Just so busy at the moment. I don't know why. Since COVID, I seem to be much more busy than I was before. And I think also since COVID, I got more nervous about saying no to things. So I do crazy things, which I shouldn't do, really.
yeah,
No, the worst was in October. I had to go to Melbourne, and it was ridiculously tight anyway. And then my flight was 38 hours delayed. So I ended up arriving Tuesday night from London in Melbourne, rehearsing Wednesday lunchtime, performing Thursday and Friday, and then coming home, which was, I'll try not to do that again. Well, much though I love going to Australia.
yeah.
Um, but yes, maybe I might write another book. I might not.
So I'm going to say this as a pastor, Stephen, as a Christian, as Church of England minister. How do you get that work-life balance? I mean, a different context, but I work really long hours, and my family and my parishioners are always saying, Alex, you need to just wind it in a bit. And you mentioned your family. Are you good at protecting the time when you're not working? Can you? No, so that's not
Hope
good, is it?
I'm working out. If I'm not practicing, then I'm emailing or writing articles. That also takes time.
So what's
Uh,
driving you there, Stephen? What is it?
don't know.
Yeah.
Feeling that, I am not that young and I don't, I have to get things done. But it's no, I'm not great at that. I'm trying to become a bit better, take some time off,
Yeah.
some
I have a
weeks off.
I have a 22-year-old daughter that
Oh,
is very similar to me, who, and I've asked her. She said, "Dad, you just got to keep walking through the doors.
mm,
we're only here once. Just keep,
yeah.
and maybe there's an element of that in you and both me. It's kind of,
Mm.
and I suppose while people are coming to see you, you want to, um,
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, my son is also quite work driven, but he's a wonderful father. And he just had a little boy in January.
so
And
grandpa then,
he's certainly more with his son than I was with him.
right?
But still, we have a very close relationship. He still
That, yeah.
lives in the same house.
That's lovely. Yeah. And have you got any time in the, can you see a gap in the diary, Stephen?
Yes, August,
August, okay.
taking at least 2 weeks, maybe more, off in August.
What will you do? Any idea?
I don't
Play the
know.
cello.
I just booked for the theatre this morning. My girlfriend and I will go. Um, might go away somewhere. Last year we managed 3 days in a hotel in France, which is very exciting.
Lovely.
Yeah, so but nothing exciting.
Well,
Maybe
I've
I'll
just
eat
booked for the
lunch.
theatre. I'm going to see Only Fools and Horses the musical tomorrow, Stephen,
Good.
with Paul Whitehouse. So I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be nice.
Great. I must say, I'm a bit snobby about musicals. I don't know why. They
Oh,
slightly.
my daughter is all right. That's not a musical, Dad. That's not a musical.
Oh, I see. What does she think is a musical?
42nd Street,
Yeah.
Chicago, West Side Story, that kind of thing.
West Side Story. Yeah, I can see that. It's wonderful, West Side Story.
So,
Yeah,
I'm sure
think
lots of
I
people
agree with
are
that.
nice.
But yeah, you know, and I do. In Madrid, I did spend a couple of hours at the Prado, which was wonderful. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So occasionally I do things outside music. Occasionally I spend time with my girlfriend or my son and daughter-in-law and grandson and friends. But
Well, Stephen, I feel very privileged that you've given me half an hour of your time in.
it's been a pleasure.
It's been lovely meeting you, and
Yeah.
and have a lovely time wherever you are in the world. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks. Bye.